I never owned a dog growing up, and yet I had a whole pack of dog friends. Dogs I knew by name, dogs I'd spend my entire days with, dogs that trusted and followed me around like I was their person. I just didn't own any of them. That was completely normal in the 70s and 80s. Before leash laws and before fenced yards became the standard, dogs were just out there. They were part of the neighborhood and an important part of our world. And if you grew up back then, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Every neighborhood had its regulars. Ours had Dolly, a black lab, friendly, loyal, would follow you anywhere. I mean that literally, I'll get into that in a second. We had Darth, some kind of mix, maybe a Corgi and German Shepherd mix. I was never totally sure. He had this dark black fur on his head that faded into a different color on the rest of his body. So naturally someone named him Darth, after Darth Vader. Which, by the way, is one of the greatest dog names I've ever heard, and it fit because Darth lived across the street in a house that had its own energy. These big, loud keg parties that went late into the night. And out back they had some really interesting plants growing that they would roll up and smoke. That part of the street had their own parties and stuff, and now I would love it, but back then I was a kid, so we weren't involved. And then there was Boomer. Boomer was an old English sheepdog, just this enormous, shaggy, lumbering animal. His owners were completely different. His dad was a physician or maybe a lawyer, one of those families that had the nicest house on the block. Boomer didn't come outside as often as the other dogs, but when he did, you just noticed because he was enormous. Just this giant, shaggy creature taking up the entire sidewalk. So you had Darth from the keg party and garden house. Boomer was the physician's house. And a retired couple who sat on the front porch in rocking chairs owned Dolly, and they were super friendly to us, and they were more than happy to let us play with Dolly. Dolly belonged to everyone in the neighborhood. We all loved her. So yeah, these dogs had owners. They had homes, but a leash, a fence, most of the time, no. They were just out, and as a kid without a dog, that was awesome, because you could basically borrow one for the entire afternoon. You'd head outside, and whatever dog was wandering the neighborhood that day, that was your dog for the day. Nobody called anyone or checked with the owner. Nobody asked permission. The dog just came along with you. So I grew up in a place called Dash Point, about 45 minutes south of Seattle. Our house was maybe a quarter mile from the water, and you could walk down a hill to a place we called the dock, and it was a dock where people would fish off of. And then once you got down there, if you took a right and headed along the beach, you'd walk like another half mile or so, and you'd hit Dash Point State Park. One memory that comes to mind in particular about the state park was I was in 3rd grade, and my little sister and my older sister and a couple of our friends decided to walk down to the state park. This time Dolly came with us. Nobody invited her. She just saw us and started following us. She just showed up at some point on the walk and decided she was coming along. And we didn't think much of it. We were just like, sweet, Dolly's here. We loved Dolly. So we spent the whole day at the beach. We're digging clams, skimboarding, and the beach had these really steep clay cliffs. You could climb up these. You weren't supposed to climb up these cliffs, but we'd climb up them. And they're kind of sketchy because every year someone would get hurt really bad, like break a femur or even worse. And at first Dolly would begin following us up the cliff, but then decide quickly that her dog paws weren't made for climbing. So as we're climbing the cliffs, we're kind of looking down, making sure Dolly's all right. And she's just having a blast down there. Other kids are petting her. She's running around, jumping in and out of the water, just getting soaked and having a blast like dogs do. Once we reached the top, we'd eventually have to climb back down, and then, we'd get to the very bottom, and wherever Dolly was, she would instantly zip towards us, and typically she was just drenched with wet sand and water, and she'd shake off and just blast us with dog water. And for some reason on this particular day, my mom decided to drive down to the state park and pick us up. I think that we were going to go out to dinner or something, and she wanted us to come home and take a shower before we went out. So she came to pick us up, found us on the beach, but she did not know Dolly was there. So you could tell she wasn't too pumped to take Dolly along with us too, but obviously we're not going to leave Dolly there. Like I said, everybody loved this dog in the neighborhood, so there wasn't really a negotiation. And if you've ever been around a wet lab, you know what that car smelled like for the next 2 weeks. But she said yes without much argument, actually, because my mom knew Dolly, everybody in the neighborhood knew Dolly. That was just the deal. And it's funny to think of Dolly's life. just think about that day in particular for a second. This is like a normal day for Dolly. She walked 1.5 miles from her house, no leash, nothing like that. Spent an entire day at a state park with a bunch of kids who didn't own her. Partially climbed clay cliffs. I think that she was digging for clams with us at one point. She met other dogs, other kids, and her owners had absolutely no idea where she was and how far she went. That's the thing that's impossible to explain to somebody who's younger, who grew up with leash laws. What we were doing wasn't irresponsible, it wasn't neglect, that's just how neighborhoods worked. Dogs were free range, and honestly, Dolly had a better day that day than most dogs ever get to have. Now, I want to be fair here about the leash laws, because it wasn't all beach days and borrowed dogs. There was a flip side. When dogs are just wandering everywhere, eventually you run into one that scares you. I remember one afternoon I came home from the backyard heading to the front of the house, and there were 2 Doberman pinschers standing in our yard. Just standing there looking at me. Those were kind of trendy at the time, Dobermans were, because I believe that Magnum PI, they had Dobermans, so every neighborhood had some. But again, no leash laws, so these are just running around loose. So these 2 dogs, I spot them, I back up to our deck, and I climb up the rails to where the dogs can't get me. And then we always left our sliding glass door unlocked on our deck, so I was able to go back into the house safely. And another time I was taking a shortcut through someone's yard. So we lived on a hill maybe 3 or 4 blocks from the beach, and you could take this long, slow road that kind of winded to get down there, or you could take a direct route by cutting through people's yards. So I was taking a shortcut through someone's yard, which I probably shouldn't have been doing, to be honest, but they had a Rottweiler on their deck. That dog came flying across the yard, and I began running away, and that dog caught me. It actually tackled me, but the owner had caught up to it just in time to make sure it didn't maim me for life. It didn't break the skin, but man, that was a close call. It scared me to death. The owner came out apologizing, and I was like, hey, look, I was cutting through your yard, so this one's kind of on me. And then there's the thing nobody talks about enough. With dogs everywhere, and I mean everywhere, you step in dog poop a heck of a lot more. I can't remember the last time I stepped in dog poop, but in the 70s and 80s, it was a normal occurrence. And you know that feeling, right? When you're walking back then. You'd be walking across a lawn or a playground, and there was this specific sensation. Your foot would start to slide just slightly, and you knew instantly what had happened. You didn't have to look down. That slide told you everything. That slow, horrible 2-inch slide meant your afternoon just got worse. And occasionally you wouldn't feel the slide and you'd step in the poop without knowing it. So you'd pile into the car for some family outing, driving down the road, and after about 5 minutes, someone would go quiet and start sniffing. And then your mom and dad would say, hey, we need to all check the bottom of our shoes. Someone stepped in something. I don't miss that part of it. It is funny, though. I think about Dolly a lot. She was my favorite dog of all time, 100%, and she wasn't even mine. And I haven't owned a dog, but I have a black cat named Violet that I kind of think is Dolly reincarnated. Black fur, totally loyal, follows me around the house. There's just something about her that always reminds me of Dolly. A different animal, a completely different era, but that same energy. The kind of creature that just gives you unconditional loyalty and you feel it immediately. Violet is my Dolly. The leash laws are probably right. I'm not out here arguing against them. Dogs live longer now. They're safer, fewer accidents. That's genuinely a good thing. But kids today who don't own a dog, they're missing out on something really specific. Back then you didn't have a dog at home, but you always had dog friends. Kids today, they don't get to experience that. The dog that wasn't yours, but you still knew by name. The one that just showed up at the right moment and decided to spend the day with you and made your day better. We didn't think of it as anything special at the time. It was just how the neighborhood worked. Looking back, it was pretty great.